I never imagined that buying my dream home would feel like stepping into a prison. When I moved into this neighborhood, I pictured quiet evenings, peaceful mornings, and the freedom to live comfortably. Instead, I found myself staring at heavy gates that seemed less like protection and more like shackles. One night, after a long day at work, I drove toward the exit, only to discover the HOA had locked me inside. My calls went unanswered. The keypad denied me, and I sat in my own car feeling trapped. In that moment, all I wanted was my freedom back. When I first signed the papers for my house, it felt like the start of a new chapter. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, neatly manicured lawns, kids riding bicycles without a care in the world. The realtor bragged about how safe and exclusive the community was, and I believed every word. It looked like the kind of place where you could finally relax after years of working hard. The first few weeks were everything I expected. Neighbors waved when I drove past. Dogs barked happily behind fences. Evenings were calm, quiet, and almost idyllic. At first, the HOA felt invisible. I received a welcome packet, a smile from a board member, and that was it. I thought, this is going to be great. The gates seemed harmless at first, too. They were advertised as a feature, added security, privacy, and a sense of exclusivity. Punch in a code, drive through, feel safe. It was all part of the neighborhood's appeal. At the time, I could not have imagined how those very gates would become symbols of control, fear, and ultimately imprisonment. I moved into the house thinking I had found the perfect balance of freedom and community. The HOA promised to maintain order, protect property values, and ensure everyone followed basic standards. To me, that sounded fine. Who would object to a little structure? I certainly did not. But what I did not realize was that I had walked into a neighborhood ruled not by common sense or fairness, but by an HOA board obsessed with power. Their rules were not about maintaining harmony. They were about control, and it did not take long before the cracks in my so-called paradise began to show. The first warning signs arrived quietly, almost like whispers. One morning, I found a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. Violation, it read in bold letters. My offense? My mailbox was not painted the approved shade of beige. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of joke. But it was real. I had 30 days to repaint or face a fine. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe they were just picky. But then came the next notice. My lawn, according to them, was too green. Yes, you heard that correctly. They claimed the grass variety I had planted was not uniform with community guidelines. Another letter. Another threat of a fine. Soon, I noticed neighbors whispering about their own run-ins with the HOA. One family was warned about their garden gnome. Another was fined for hanging wind chimes. A couple down the street had their fence height challenged. It was apparently 2 inches above the approved maximum. I started to see the HOA less as an organizer and more as a watchdog. They were not maintaining order. They were policing us like prisoners in our own homes. The smiling faces from the welcome packet began to feel like masks hiding something more sinister. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I could just play along, keep my head down, and avoid trouble. After all, I had moved here for peace, not conflict. But deep down, I started to worry. If they could control mailbox colors and grass types, what else could they control? How far would they take it? The answer came sooner than I expected, and it shook me to my core. The gates that once seemed like symbols of safety would become the very thing that trapped me, stripping away my sense of freedom one keypad code at a time. It started with an email. For the safety of our residents, the HOA board has voted to implement tighter access restrictions at all gates. At first, it sounded harmless, but hidden in the details was the nightmare that would change everything. The board had decided that all residents would receive unique codes that expired monthly. Visitors, delivery drivers, and even family members needed pre-approval at least 24 hours in advance. No exceptions. The first time I realized how insane this was, I had invited my parents over for dinner. When they arrived, the gate refused to open. They called me confused. I tried to enter their names into the visitor portal, but the system told me requests had to be filed the day before. My parents sat outside, embarrassed and frustrated, while I argued with the guard on duty. After 30 minutes of pleading, they were finally allowed in. The meal was cold by the time we sat down, and the night was ruined. That was just the beginning. Delivery drivers stopped coming altogether, refusing to deal with the hassle. Friends stopped visiting because it felt like applying for a visa just to grab a drink. Even emergency services had trouble. One neighbor told me an ambulance was delayed at the gate while trying to reach his house. The worst moment for me personally came late one night. I had been working long hours and needed to head into the city for an early appointment. I pulled up to the gate at dawn, exhausted but determined to get to work. I punched in my code. Denied. I tried again. Denied. I called the HOA hotline. No answer. I sat there, trapped, realizing that I could not even leave my own neighborhood without their permission. It hit me like a brick wall. I was no longer a homeowner. I was a prisoner behind their gates. As the weeks went on, the HOA tightened its grip. They issued fines to anyone who attempted to bypass the gate rules. Some residents were penalized simply because their guests arrived without approval. Others received warning letters for unauthorized entries when the guard allowed someone in out of kindness. One evening, I attended an HOA meeting determined to raise concerns. I explained how the gates delayed emergency services, how deliveries were impossible, and how friends felt unwelcome. Instead of listening, the board members smirked. One woman leaned forward and said, "If you cannot follow the rules, perhaps this community is not the right fit for you." The room erupted into whispers. Some neighbors nodded in fear, unwilling to speak up. Others looked at me with sympathy, but kept their mouths shut. The HOA had created a culture of intimidation. People were too scared to push back. My humiliation grew when the board president publicly called me a complainer. He accused me of exaggerating, claiming the rules protected us from crime. But there was no crime wave, no evidence of danger. This was not about safety. It was about control. From that day forward, I knew the HOA was not just annoying. They were dangerous. And if I did not fight back, they would keep tightening the leash until none of us had any freedom left. The breaking point came on a morning I will never forget. I had an important presentation at work. Missing it was not an option. I left my house early, confident I would make it on time. But when I reached the gate, the keypad rejected my code. I tried calling. No answer. I tried honking. Nothing. Minutes ticked by as panic set in. I was literally locked inside my own neighborhood. My career, my livelihood was on the line, and I could not even leave my driveway. As I sat there, anger boiling, a siren wailed in the distance. An ambulance pulled up behind me, lights flashing. The driver leaned out the window, shouting in frustration, "They will not open the gate." I watched in horror as precious minutes slipped away. Someone's life could have been at risk, and the HOA treated it like paperwork. That was it. Enough was enough. This was no longer about mailboxes or grass. This was about freedom, safety, and basic human dignity. I swore then and there that I would fight them with everything I had. I began by documenting everything. Every denied entry, every delayed emergency, every visitor turned away. I collected testimonies from neighbors who had been harassed or fined. Slowly, a group of us came together, quiet voices ready to be heard. We demanded answers at the next meeting. When the board tried to dismiss us, we threatened legal action. I quoted laws about unlawful detainment and public safety. I reminded them that emergency responders had already filed complaints. The board doubled down, insisting they were within their rights. The tension grew until the room buzzed with anger. For the first time, neighbors who had once stayed silent spoke up. People were tired of living under fear. The board threatened us, saying if we did not comply, they would escalate fines and even pursue foreclosure proceedings. But this time, their threats no longer worked. We had power in numbers, and we were not backing down. Our complaints reached the city council. Local authorities launched an investigation. Within weeks, officials confirmed what we already knew. The HOA had crossed a line. Locking residents inside violated multiple safety codes. Emergency services documented dangerous delays. Legal experts warned that the HOA could face lawsuits for unlawful restraint. The smug board members who once dismissed us now sat sweating as officials tore apart their so-called policies. When the city ordered them to dismantle or modify the gates, the board's power collapsed. Their arrogance had backfired, and they were left scrambling to explain themselves. The gates were reprogrammed, code simplified, and visitor access restored. Delivery drivers returned. Families welcomed guests without fear. The neighborhood slowly began to breathe again. The HOA board, once feared, was humiliated. Several members resigned under pressure. Those who remained lost credibility. No one took them seriously anymore. For the first time in years, neighbors smiled again. We waved to each other, without glancing nervously at who might be watching. The shadow of intimidation lifted, and in its place grew a sense of unity. Looking back, I realized that freedom is not something you can assume, even in your own home. The moment you stop standing up for your rights, some will take them away, little by little, rule by rule, until you are trapped behind gates you never agreed to. The HOA thought they could control us, but the truth is, their power only existed because we allowed it. When we united, when we refused to bow down, their authority crumbled. Now, every time I drive through those gates freely, I remind myself of one lesson. Never surrender your freedom, not to anyone, not even to an HOA.